Toxic plants are hiding in plain sight in gardens all over the country, and there's a shrub sold at almost every garden center in America where every single part, the leaves, the flowers, even the smoke if it's burned, can be lethal, and it's often planted right next to swing sets. This video answers one simple question: which common, beautiful plants deserve real caution, and how can they be kept safely if they're already loved and growing at home? Take a breath. Because this isn't about fear, it's about knowing exactly what's growing in the yard. Foxglove. Most people know it as the tall spike of purple bell-shaped flowers that gives an English cottage garden its classic look, often standing taller than the surrounding plants, with rows of speckled, thimble-shaped blooms running up each stem. Few people realize this same plant is where modern heart medicine actually comes from. Digitalis, a drug still prescribed today to help hearts beat properly, is derived directly from foxglove, which means this flower is both a real medicine and a real poison, depending entirely on how much of it enters the body. Every part of the plant, the leaves, the flowers, and the seeds, contains compounds called cardiac glycosides, and eating any part of it can cause nausea, blurred or oddly colored vision, and a heartbeat that turns dangerously slow or irregular. Foxglove tends to bloom in late spring into early summer, and taller varieties often need staking in a windy spot so the heavy flower spikes do not topple over. Foxglove is safe to keep in most gardens since serious poisonings are rare. What matters more than removing it is planting it out of easy reach of small children and grazing pets, and wearing gloves when cutting it back, since the plant's toxins can be absorbed slowly through skin with repeated handling. Foxglove is also a biennial rather than a true perennial, meaning it grows only leaves in its first year and sends up that tall flowering spike in its second. So a patch left alone will naturally reseed and return on its own most years, filling the same corner of the garden without any replanting required. Most real poisoning cases do not happen from people eating flowers on purpose. They happen because foxglove leaves look remarkably similar to two edible plants, borage and comfrey, and home cooks have picked the wrong one by mistake while harvesting greens for a salad or a pot of soup. The story behind that heart medicine is worth remembering, too. In the 1780s, a physician named William Withering studied an old folk remedy for a condition then called dropsy, what doctors today would recognize as heart failure, and traced its effectiveness back to foxglove, turning a garden flower into one of the most important discoveries in the history of cardiology, one that still saves lives in hospitals every single day: hydrangea. Most people know it as the classic big round bloom cluster in blue, pink, or white that fills up porches, bridal bouquets, and cottage gardens every summer, often blooming from early summer all the way into fall, depending on the variety and how it was pruned the season before. It is a little startling to learn that hydrangeas actually contain cyanogenic compounds, the same category of chemical found in apple seeds and cherry pits, and when the leaves or flower buds are chewed, they can release small amounts of cyanide into the body. That sounds alarming, but the real picture is much gentler than it first seems. In most cases, especially in pets who nibble a leaf or two, the result is mild stomach upset rather than anything severe. Things like vomiting, diarrhea, low energy, or a lost appetite. True cyanide poisoning is considered rare, mostly because it would take a large amount of plant material to cause it. Given that, hydrangeas remain a very low-risk plant to keep in almost any garden, and the simplest habits are gently discouraging pets and curious kids from chewing on the leaves or flower heads, and disposing of pruned clippings and yard waste, rather than leaving them to wilt within reach, since wilting can slightly concentrate the toxins inside the leaves. For best results, hydrangeas do best planted somewhere that gets morning sun and afternoon shade, since too much hot, direct sun can scorch the big leaves and cause the blooms to fade faster than they should, especially in warmer parts of the country. On a lighter note, hydrangeas have one more trick that has nothing to do with danger at all. Their flower color actually shifts with the soil they grow in, turning blue in acidic soil and pink in alkaline soil. A small piece of garden chemistry that turns out to be far more interesting than the plant's mild toxicity ever is, and one that many gardeners deliberately experiment with using soil amendments, sometimes turning a single shrub a slightly different shade from one season to the next: oleander. Most people know it as the tough, drought-tolerant shrub covered in pink or white flowers that lines highway medians and coastal yards across the South and California. Prized by landscapers for surviving heat, salt spray, and long stretches without water. Behind that hardy, low-maintenance reputation sits a plant that is toxic in every single part: the leaves, the flowers, the stems, the sap, and even the smoke if it is ever burned. A well-known story has circulated for centuries, claiming that soldiers once died after roasting meat on skewers cut from oleander branches. That story has been repeated in gardening books since the 1800s, though modern toxicologists consider it more legend than confirmed history, since the amount of toxin that actually transfers into cooked meat is small. Still, the underlying danger is very real, and eating any part of the plant can cause severe nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, an irregular heartbeat, drowsiness, and in serious cases, cardiac arrest. Oleander's leaves taste extremely bitter, so accidental poisoning is uncommon in practice, and keeping it safely comes down to a few simple habits. Never burn or compost oleander clippings, never use its branches for skewers or garden stakes, and wear gloves when pruning it, since the sap alone can irritate skin and cause a rash in people with sensitive skin. Pruning right after the main summer bloom fades also keeps the shrub a manageable size without sacrificing next year's flowers. It is also worth planting it somewhere out of the way of a vegetable garden, since fallen leaves that blow into nearby beds can linger in the soil longer than most people expect, and children's play areas should be kept a comfortable distance away as well. Writers in ancient Rome, including Pliny the Elder, were already describing oleander's danger nearly 2,000 years ago, and that same toxicity is exactly why deer instinctively avoid the plant altogether, which is part of why it remains such a popular choice for public roadways today, where almost nothing else can survive without constant watering. Lily of the valley. Most people know it as the tiny, sweet-smelling white bell flowers, often tucked into wedding bouquets, including some worn by British royals over the years, and prized for the way its scent can fill an entire room from just a small handful of stems. The danger with this one goes further than most people expect. Even the water sitting in a vase of cut lily of the valley can contain enough toxin to make someone sick, simply from the stems sitting in it, which surprises people who assume the danger only comes from actually eating the plant. The entire plant carries cardiac glycosides, including the small red-orange berries that appear later in the season, and those berries are especially tempting to children because they look sweet and harmless. Eating any part of the plant can cause nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, and a heartbeat that turns dangerously slow or irregular, though severe poisoning is uncommon overall. Because of that, lily of the valley remains a popular, low-maintenance ground cover for shady spots in the garden, as long as a couple of small habits are kept up. Deadhead or remove the berries if small children or curious pets spend time in the yard, and pour out any vase water from cut stems somewhere out of reach rather than leaving it sitting on a table or counter, and rinse the vase itself before using it for anything else. This ground cover spreads readily once it settles in, forming a thick, weed-suppressing carpet under trees where grass often struggles to grow in deep shade, which is part of why it has stayed so popular in shaded yards for generations, even among gardeners who know exactly how toxic it is, and why it can be surprisingly hard to fully remove once it takes hold. There is a gentler side to this plant, too. It is the official birth flower for the month of May, and for a long time it has symbolized purity and a return to happiness. It is also reported to have been Queen Elizabeth II's favorite flower, a strange and lovely contradiction, a plant delicate enough for a royal bouquet, yet familiar enough to poison control centers around the world to earn its own warning label. Castor bean. Most people know it as the dramatic, fast-growing plant with huge star-shaped leaves and spiky red seed pods, often planted for its bold, almost tropical look in the back of a flower bed, sometimes reaching well over head height in a single growing season. This one carries a title most gardeners would never guess. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the castor bean is the most poisonous common plant in the world thanks to a toxin called ricin found concentrated inside its seeds. Ricin is so potent that it has actually been used in real-world poisonings, including a well-documented assassination in London in 1978, where it was used to kill a journalist, a case still studied in toxicology courses today for how the poison was actually delivered to the victim. The seeds are by far the most dangerous part of the plant. Chewing and swallowing even a small handful can be fatal, and symptoms include severe stomach pain, vomiting, bloody diarrhea, and organ failure over the following days in the worst cases. Given how serious that risk is, especially with young children or curious pets around, the safest approach is either removing the seed pods before they mature and split open, or avoiding the plant entirely in households with small kids. If an established plant needs to come out, every fallen seed should be carefully collected and thrown away, never added to a compost pile, and the area should be checked again a season later for any seedlings that sprouted from missed seeds. This plant grows remarkably fast for an ornamental, often reaching full size in a single season from seed, which is part of why gardeners like it for filling in a bare, empty corner of the yard quickly, sometimes within just a few months of planting. There is a reassuring twist to close on. The castor oil sold in stores and used in cosmetics and skin products comes from these same seeds, but the ricin is destroyed during processing, which is exactly why the refined oil on store shelves is safe to use, even though the plant it came from is anything but. Rhubarb leaves. Most people know rhubarb from the tart pink stalks that go into a classic pie or crumble, a beloved staple in backyard vegetable gardens across the country, often one of the very first harvests of the growing season, and a plant that returns reliably year after year. Right next to those safe, edible stalks sits something far more dangerous. During World War I, when food was scarce across Britain, the government actually recommended rhubarb leaves as a vegetable substitute to help stretch limited food supplies. People followed that advice, got sick, and some even died, a well-meaning suggestion that turned into a quiet tragedy. The leaves contain very high concentrations of oxalic acid, and eating a significant amount can cause burning in the mouth and throat, nausea, vomiting, and damage to the kidneys in severe cases, since they can become overwhelmed trying to filter that much acid out of the blood. None of that changes how easy rhubarb is to grow safely at home. The only real habit to keep is cutting off the leaves and discarding them, rather than eating or composting them in large amounts and only bringing the stalks into the kitchen for cooking. A yearly top dressing of compost around the base helps rhubarb too, since it is a heavy feeder that rewards rich soil with thicker, more tender stalks. Most gardeners simply twist or cut the leaf away right where it meets the stalk as soon as the plant is harvested, so the leaf never even makes it into the kitchen in the first place, and a quick rinse of the stalk is all that is needed after that. It helps to know that oxalic acid itself is not some rare or unusual substance. Small, harmless amounts of it show up in many common foods, including spinach. It is simply the concentration found in rhubarb leaves that sets this plant apart, proof that even official advice, given with the best intentions, can still miss something important. Azalea. Most people know it as the bright pink, red, and white flowering shrub that explodes into color every spring across southern yards and suburban gardens alike, often planted in long rows along a foundation or fence line for a burst of seasonal color. Tucked inside that cheerful spring display is a connection to something called mad honey, a real and strangely fascinating toxic honey made when bees feed on the nectar of azaleas and their close relatives, rhododendrons. This is not some obscure modern discovery either. The Greek historian Xenophon recorded the very first known account of mad honey poisoning all the way back in the year 401 BC, when soldiers in his army ate infected honeycomb along their route and were left completely unable to fight for a full day, lying in the field as if they'd suffered a crushing defeat. They got lucky. No enemy found them while they were down. But the danger they stumbled into by accident, someone else later turned into a weapon on purpose. Centuries afterward, in the 1st century BC, a Black Sea tribe left poisoned honeycombs directly in the path of advancing Roman soldiers under Pompey. The Romans ate it, collapsed the same way, and were slaughtered while they were too disabled to fight back. Every part of the azalea plant, especially the leaves, contains compounds called granotoxins, and in pets, and occasionally in people, eating enough of the plant can cause drooling, vomiting, weakness, a slowed heart rate, and low blood pressure, with collapse possible in the worst cases. Real poisoning usually requires eating a fairly significant amount of leaf material, which keeps azaleas a fairly low-risk shrub for most gardens. Keeping that risk low is mostly about keeping grazing pets like dogs, cats, and especially livestock away from the shrub, and raking up and disposing of fallen leaves rather than letting them sit where a curious pet might nibble them. This shrub prefers slightly acidic soil and dappled shade, so a spot under tall trees that filters the harshest afternoon sun tends to produce the healthiest, longest-lasting blooms each spring. What makes this story even stranger is that mad honey has never really disappeared. It is still deliberately harvested and sold today in parts of Turkey, where a small dose is used in traditional folk medicine, meaning this same colorful backyard shrub carries an unbroken 2,400-year history of quietly affecting the people who come near it, whether on an ancient battlefield or in a modern kitchen halfway around the world. Daffodil bulbs. Most people know daffodils as the cheerful yellow trumpet flowers that are often the very first sign that spring has arrived in the garden, pushing up through the soil while the rest of the yard still looks bare and gray. Underground, though, those same bulbs look remarkably similar to onions, and that resemblance has genuinely fooled people in their own kitchens. In one documented case, a family chopped daffodil bulbs from their own garden into a curry, mistaking them for onions, and ended up with nausea and vomiting within the hour. An ordinary dinner turned into an unplanned and thankfully minor trip to the emergency room. The bulb contains the highest concentration of a toxic alkaloid called licorine, though the leaves and stems carry some of it as well, and eating any part can cause rapid nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, and diarrhea, with symptoms usually starting within about an hour of eating it. Cases like that are almost always the cause, rather than any casual contact with the flowers themselves, which is why daffodils stay a low-risk, easy plant to grow. The simplest habit worth building is storing any dug-up bulbs clearly labeled and kept completely separate from real kitchen onions or garlic, and keeping bulbs out of areas where young children like to dig. Planting daffodils in a dedicated flower bed rather than near the vegetable garden helps too, since there is never a moment of confusion between the two while harvesting dinner ingredients on a busy evening. These bulbs also naturalize well, meaning a small cluster, planted one autumn, will often multiply into a much larger patch within just a few years without any extra effort. One smaller detail is worth knowing as well. Handling large numbers of daffodils, something florists and bulb growers deal with regularly, can cause a mild skin irritation sometimes nicknamed daffodil picker's rash. In Japan alone, health officials recorded around 195 accidental daffodil poisonings over one recent decade, most of them starting the same basic way: a bulb mistaken for an onion or a leaf, mistaken for a chive in someone's own kitchen, rather than left in the garden bed where it belonged. Thank you for watching. If you want another story right now, there is one waiting for you on your screen. And if you enjoyed this one, subscribe so you never miss the next.